I truly believe that our shared experiences are the key to another person's self-empowerment. We talk about transition being like about changing ourselves. For me, it's actually about becoming my true self. For a long time, spoke about my authenticity in the context of my transness, but it's just a small part of who I am. It's not all of me. The same movement that is attempting to roll back LGBTQ plus rights is the very same movement that is seeking to erode women's rights. Like, we cannot afford to succumb to the pressure or retreat. I remember just thinking to myself when I was young, things were really intense and really hard and really difficult. And there were times where I thought that I wasn't going to make it. And actually, not to get entirely personal, but there were times that I almost didn't.
Hello and welcome back to the queerest podcast telling the fiercest stories. This is Queer Talker and I'm Ben Cicchetti. Before we get to my conversation with the incredible Jude Guaitamacchi, I have a very quick favour to ask. Wherever you are watching or listening to this episode, hit that subscribe button. It's one click and it's going to make a massive difference. It's going to allow me to grow this podcast, grow the community, and continue bringing you the best and the queerest episodes every single time. So in advance, thank you. Now to my conversation with Jude. Jude, we are going to start with a little game I like to call Queer Panic. You just respond with the first thing that comes to your mind. Starting with, what was the first album you ever owned?
So I'm going to say this with my full chest, okay? But the first album I ever owned was the Spice Girls when I was 10 years old. But at the same time, my dad also got me an Oasis album as well. So I don't know which one came first, but I was definitely a non-binary child even back then.
Spice Girls are cool. I'm just going to put it out there. Spice Girls was one of my first albums, so I'm obsessed. That's a great answer. Speaking of music, if you had to lip sync for your life, what song would you choose?
I think you will never see me lip syncing for your life. That's just something that I just wouldn't do. Even if I was on stage in front of RuPaul, I'd be like, listen, babe, I'm not a lip syncer. And I'm so atrociously terrible when it comes to music. I really, really am. It's embarrassing. And I love music, don't get me wrong, but I just get stuck on the same song over and over again. And so recently I stumbled across Youngblood because I was at the Attitude Awards and he was there and I checked out his music and I loved it. So love a bit of Youngblood. Not sure if it's this lip sync for your life kind of song, but
I could think you can bring the vibe. His new album's amazing. I love his new album.
It's great. Yeah, it's great. So, I mean, let's just say
I've got a playlist I add them to, so I'm just going to pick my favourite Youngblood song and I'll add it on there, and that'll be your lip sync song if this ever happens.
Right.
What is your favourite queer movie or TV show?
Right. So, I absolutely loved Pose. I was such a fan of the show. I watched the first episode and I just binge watched it, I think, in one go. But I know there's been some controversy with Ryan Murphy, but for me, it was really all about the actors and the fact that they were really authentically representing and telling the story of ballroom culture. And I know that I was even looking into the stories of the actors and some of them were actually from that era as well. And I just found it so fascinating to learn about their stories as trans people living in New York. It really told the story of the AIDS crisis as well. And it really gave you a sense of that time in history. And I was hooked. I really, really, really love Pose. So I'm a Pose fan for sure.
Yeah, I love it. Such a good show. And I think I love shows like that because so much of our history can get forgotten. And, we see RuPaul's Drag Race is a great example of this, right? And we just kind of had this picture of where drag came from. But to kind of get that background and to get that history lesson on New York, the ballroom culture and everything that it came from it. Same with things like It's a Sin and talking about the AIDS crisis is just such an incredibly important thing that we don't forget. And that we kind of have that respect for the people that came before us and paved the way for us to be able to sit here and have this podcast today. So I love that show.
And I love the fact that there are shows out there that are so informative and educational. I'm hugely dyslexic. I'm not a big reader, but I love documentaries. I love learning, and especially when it comes to the history of our community. So many of us grew up with Section 28, and we just had no access to any information about our own community. So to be able to learn in that way, just for me, it was a phenomenal show, and I'm a big Indie Moore fan.
There we go. Yeah, I love that. Dream podcast guest, in case they're listening.
Yes, absolutely.
Who is your ultimate queer icon?
Do you know what? I really, really struggle to think of who my icons actually are. I feel like there are so many amazing advocates and celebrities and people that I admire today and like throughout history who've made such a difference within the community. But there's also people that don't have visibility, right? Who won't go down in the history books, who've made such a difference to people's lives. And I can't help wanting to celebrate those who don't get to be celebrated. I mean, I do admire people, don't get me wrong, but I've got to this point in my life where I really strongly believe in like not deifying people. Like I feel like it's how systems work better without with the distribution of power, not domination, right? And I feel like when we like surrender our power, our faith, like one singular person, we almost end up trading our agency and have an illusion of security. Like so many people have fallen off my pedestal throughout the years. I've had so many people that I've looked up to, and you know, I used to work in TV as well, so I got to meet a lot of people that I looked up to, and time again, I'd be like, oh wow, you know, and actually, I feel like concentrating all our trust on like a hero, we end up like dismantling the very checks and balances that protect community. And so I guess I'm learning nowadays, and I know this is a very, very deep answer to this question. I'm understanding that the definition of leadership isn't necessarily standing in front. It's standing side by side. It's standing behind and helping people empower themselves. So empowering others and fostering an environment that prioritizes like collective growth rather than one singular person. So for me, leadership is all about empowering others and not necessarily being seen. So my icons, I would say, would have to be the people that remain unseen and the people that do phenomenal work for the queer community and don't get praised for it, but who deserve celebration.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible answer. Yeah, it is those people behind the scenes that kind of make everything happen, and they're as just as important, if not more important, than the people that kind of appear. You know, I was thinking about this. We were at an event recently which you hosted, and we were talking about TV, and we talked about representation on screen. But actually, I was thinking about how important the representation behind the camera is, because those are the people that are going to be helping to make decisions around editing, around production, to ensure that there is kind of good representation. So I completely agree with you, kind of celebrating those that we see and those that we don't.
Absolutely. They all have their place, should we say, as well.
100%. Okay, but we are going to go back to a single person. So who is one person you would like to hear on this podcast?
Ooh. I would love to hear more from Bimini. And I say that because I was on Bimini's podcast and I've seen them interview just an enormous amount of people. And I love their work. I think they've done an incredible job at uplifting lots of people's voices, and they have done singular episodes and they do talk about themselves. But I would love to hear more. I'd love to see them interviewed more. So I'm going to say Bimini.
Yeah, that's a great choice. I think they have they're just one of the smartest people that I've heard speak about such a wide variety of issues as well, that I think they'd make an incredible guest. So yes, I will slide into their DMs and we'll see if we can make it happen. Final of our Queer Panic questions. What is one word you would use to describe your childhood?
Tough or difficult. One of the two.
Okay.
It certainly wasn't easy. And, that being said, I don't feel like I'd be the person I am today without having gone through those challenges. So it was tough. I was born in Italy. English wasn't my first language. My parents went through the messiest separation known to the history of the human race. Like their separation and divorce was something that lasted throughout my entire childhood. And I really, really got caught in the crossfire of that, and subsequently don't have a relationship with a lot of my family. But I just didn't have a lot of love growing up, which is, I know, sad. I mean, it's a sad thing to acknowledge, and I do acknowledge that. And I developed coping mechanisms. I struggled with addiction growing up. I did a lot of things to try and find the love that I was missing in my life. And I just became really unwell. And underneath all of that, I was carrying this trans experience that I didn't even know or was aware of until much later in my life. And I became a chameleon. I just, throughout my young life, I did everything I could to just try and fit in. And I was bullied relentlessly. And I really lost who I was or my sense of self, trying to get people to like me. And I mean, I ended up in a rehab at the age of 20. That's how bad it got, right? And I had to really kind of work through my young adult life to just become a stable human being. So it's by no means been smooth sailing. I feel like I've been untangling a lot of my childhood throughout my adult life, and it's not necessarily something people know about me, and it's something that I actually brought into my career as a public speaker later in life. I very much wanted to be the role model that I needed growing up. So it was a struggle. I've given you one word and a whole narrative.
No, it is super interesting because I do think it's so important to understand who we were when we were younger to understand who we are today. So kind of getting that insight into who people are and kind of what shaped them. I also think you said something there which I find super interesting, which is around kind of role models. And, I'm a big believer in be the person you needed when you were younger. So do you remember as a young person who the first kind of LGBTQ plus person you became aware of was? And I guess even more specifically than that, if possible, like who was the first trans person you became aware of and how that felt seeing that in front of you?
This is the thing, right? And because my experience as a young person was, I was so far detached from that part of my experience, despite the fact that when I realized that I was trans at the late age of 30, when I look back, I can see that it was always with me, right? Especially in those early years. But I just, having grown up in a way that really kind of detached me from that sense of who I was. And of course, fed into all the mental health struggles that I was dealing with at the time. Like it of course would have made it a lot worse unknowingly. I was this very anxious, very underconfident, fearful child who was desperate to be liked. And just, I don't think I would have been able to acknowledge that I was trans, even though I did see Nadia on Big Brother, like every other millennial. She was somebody that I remember growing up. And I just, to be honest, and this goes to show, I think I was 18 when she was in the Big Brother house, or 17. She was just like the rest of the housemates, I remember just having this feeling. She was this household name. She was loved. She was just, she had this part of her experience. And I remember that versus, the world we're living in today, where there's all this kind of, controversy and like the idea of being trans is just met with so much resistance and and there's just so it's very different it was a very different time back then. There was less representation, but the representation that was there wasn't met with so much hostility. And so I do remember that, but it didn't necessarily kind of the ball didn't drop at that time for me, shall we say. Like it took meeting trans people later in life for me to really acknowledge that part of myself.
Yeah, I think Nadia is such a fascinating person in kind of the history of LGBTQ plus people. I'd love to have her on the podcast because I think she does. I don't think she necessarily gets her flowers because, to your point, Big Brother's a popularity contest, and you have to, and especially in those early seasons in the UK, it was huge. And so to win Big Brother, which Nadia did, you had to be the most popular housemate. And then to think about where we've come to now, where there is such hostility towards the LGBTQ plus community, but very specifically trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming individuals, it's kind of crazy to think that in many ways, for someone like Nadia, life may have been easier in, I guess it was the early 2000s, than it is today. So it's kind of that really sharp and clear view of how we have gone backwards rather than forwards, which is really disappointing. But yeah, I think she's incredible.
I do as well. And honestly, it was such a moment last year getting to meet her, because I just was like, oh my God, you were a big part of just my, and I don't know where she went. She sort of just resurfaced all of a sudden I was seeing her on Loose Women, and but yeah, she's a wonderful human being, and she really did pave the way for so many trans people in this community. So yeah, she definitely deserves a celebration, and she should definitely try and get her on the podcast.
Yeah, and I love that she featured in What It Feels Like for a Girl. She featured on
Yeah.
the BBC show where they kind of showed the characters seeing her win and kind of the impact that had. So I do think she's getting kind of almost a renaissance of attention, which I think she very heartily deserves. Many of us kind of have a memory of that first spark of what I would call kind of that inner queerness. Do you remember when you did feel that in yourself and how it felt to feel that in yourself?
So like backtracking to when I was really, really young, in those early years, I remember this feeling of being different and not knowing why. I also remember feeling like I wanted to look like a boy. I hung around with the other boys. I had friends that were, I'd always play the male character and the knight, and there's pictures of me wearing chainmail, and it's, of course, there's nothing wrong with young girls doing that, but for me, it was much deeper than that, right? It was a sense of identity, and I don't identify as a trans man. I do identify as non-binary, transmasc non-binary, but I just remember this feeling back then. But I learned to I internalized shame around that part of my identity because it just wasn't encouraged. So that was probably where I felt a sense of I'm different. But then I started to feel like I'm different, but there's something wrong with me. I'm not allowed to do this. And so I guess, understanding my queerness came a little bit later. I realized that I was attracted to girls when I was in my early teens, but I made a promise to myself that I would never tell anyone. And that was because at the time I was being really badly bullied. I was actually called a lesbian at school. I was called a boy, and not in a positive way. And I didn't even know what the word lesbian meant. So to be bullied for being a lesbian or looking like a boy and behaving like a boy, and then to come to terms with my sexuality, I just, I discarded it, and I tried to do everything I could not to be that. And it's a sad thought to think back and think that I held so much shame, whereas today I know there's nothing wrong with that, and so it took me a long time to embrace my queerness and to truly understand it. I mean, things have changed over time. I understand that who we are isn't fixed. Things can change, actually, which, to me really blew my mind, like to understand that about queerness. And I feel like there's so much misunderstanding. And I really had to understand what this meant to me as a young person. I remember seeing same gender couples holding hands at college when I was 17, and that kind of gave me permission to begin to explore that within myself. And that's why I think that representation is so important. Like, we talk about representation on TV, and the audience that, the millions of people that see people on our screens, and the power of sharing our experiences as well, which is what I do as a public speaker, right? That prompted me in my own career. I wanted to be that role model. And, I truly believe that our shared experiences are the key to another person's self-empowerment, because they're able to, it gives people permission, right? And so I had to go through that journey. And many people go through that at a young age, did go through that at a younger age. So it's been a bit of a process for me. But to kind of really untangle all that shame, I mean, I'm still doing that today. It's not an overnight process.
Yeah, and to your point, it is, everyone has that kind of unique journey that they go on. And that is why I think representation is so important. It's why I love doing this podcast, because I think it's so important to tell so many different versions of similar stories, meaning different people go through it at either a young age, or some people go through it at a much older age when they kind of come to terms with how they feel. So I think it is so incredibly important. But what I've admire about you so much is just how authentic you come across. Like, I've spent time with you in person. I've spent time now with you doing this podcast, and every interaction I have with you, I just feel like I'm getting the real Jude. So when do you think you first felt authentically yourself? And then when did you feel you could just be your authentic self unapologetically and bring it to everything you do?
So it's a very broad question, right? I talked you through my childhood and the young kid that I was, that fearful, nervous child. And I have lots of tales I'm not going to share here, but I I've been working on we develop a mask throughout our lives. It's like a defense mechanism, and I developed these coping mechanisms. But I also I became a problem kid. I did things to try and get validation and to be liked by other people when I was growing up. And I've spent a lot of my adult life trying to take that mask off, and transition was a part of that. So going through my physical change and changing my pronouns and my name, although I don't really see it as a change, I see it more as alignment to my true self. So we talk about
Yeah.
transition being like about changing ourselves. For me, it's actually about becoming my true self. But that was just one part of the journey, one small part of the journey. Now I'm dealing with more of the nitty gritty imposter syndrome stuff, like fear of being seen, not feeling enough, not feeling like I belong. Like I still get like little pangs when when something happens and it makes me feel that way, because I developed this belief system about myself in those early years that's ingrained within me. And even though intellectually I know those things aren't true, like within me, those beliefs are still there. So when you ask that question, when we think about authenticity in the queer community, often we're only referring to our queerness, and we associate that word with just that part of our identity. And I, for a long time, spoke about my authenticity in the context of my transness. But it's just a small part of who I am. It's not all of me. And so much of me has gotten lost in making that part the most prominent part of my identity. So I think for me, becoming truly authentic today means exploring who I am beyond my transness. It's exploring the parts of myself where I had to like adapt or change to fit into the world around me. Like I'm neurodivergent, for example. And one thing that I'm acknowledging now at the moment is just how much I mask. Like I feel an enormous amount of anxiety. I was hosting this event the other day, and I could hear myself, right? I could hear my mind ask myself, is this appropriate to say? If I crack a joke, how are other people going to respond? Like I was monitoring my thoughts and wondering, what the social rules were. And like
Yeah.
for me, I haven't really done a lot of work around that. Like I put an impossible standards. I set myself an impossible standard sometimes. And I have imposter syndromes because I hear these incredibly eloquent and academic and activists out there, and I want to match that. I think that there's an expectation, and there often is, right, when you position yourself as an advocate to present yourself in a certain way. You have got to be really politically informed, you have to be really articulate, and just not part of my I was barely at school growing up. That's my truth. And the reason for that is because I was tackling homelessness, I was tackling addiction, and it's a valid part of my experience, but it doesn't make me inadequate. And this is a belief system I'm beginning to understand. Like my strengths, for example, has been, I've got a very creative mind. I've initiated some groundbreaking projects. I come up with ideas and I'm very good at executing them, but I don't necessarily need to be this person that I feel like I need to be. So when it comes to authenticity, I'm not at the point yet where I feel like I can accept and love myself in a way that I would like to. But I'm on this part of my journey now. And, a lot of people turn to me for, my trans experience, and it's kind of becoming a bit outdated for me today. I'm like, I'm at a point now where I've got to focus on more, right? I'm on this next stage of my journey. And that's why I feel like so many of us, in fact, I've heard it before where people say, look, many of us transition, right? So many of us do. But what we mean by that, I believe, is that we learn to be a true version of ourselves, and we learn to be authentic. And that's an individual journey. And for trans people, yes, we have this side of our experience, but I'm where it's skin deep. There's so much more to us than what's on the outside.
Yeah, I agree. And it was actually, that event last week, it was one of the biggest takeaways I took. I think it was Zila said, my transness is the context, not the plot. And I just thought that was such an interesting and incredible way to put it, is that yes, it's important. And yes, it provides a context to who I am, but it's not all that I am. And I think we all kind of go on that journey to unpick that and to determine kind of who are we. I also think it's incredible how many people do suffer from imposter syndrome. I think it's a sign of people that are pushing themselves into those uncomfortable circumstances or those uncomfortable situations. But actually, it's our ability to do that then helps us kind of overcome that imposter syndrome and to kind of see ourselves often the way other people already see us as the expert or as the person that comes across incredibly well on stage. We often don't see it in ourselves. And one of the things we kind of, when we started talking about this conversation, we talked about you as a young person, and you've spoken about kind of the trauma and homelessness and kind of mental health challenges. But you've also said, and you said it earlier, you wouldn't change any of that because it made you who you are today. So how do you think all those experiences shaped kind of you and the activism now that you do?
I mean, you know, I do look back, and those experiences have undoubtedly left a mark on me, right? They still affect me today. But they've also strengthened me in many ways. Like, they shaped a level of empathy and sensitivity that I have today that can either be my biggest weakness, but they can also be my biggest strength. And it's all dependent on how I manage that. You know, I, like many people that have struggled with trauma or mental health, it's about how we manage it. And for a long time, for the last few years, actually, I was stuck in this cycle. I came out of a relationship that really affected me on the other side, you know, and you know, I've had to deal with that over the years, but a lot came up for me over the last 3 years of that relationship ending, and you know, I got kind of stuck in with a lot of activism work and a lot of my projects, but I got stuck in this cycle of just overworking, overdoing it, perhaps burying myself, and burning out. And when you're doing that and your nervous system, I mean, I think in 2024, I counted like 4 or 5 projects that I was doing, like campaigns and initiatives. And bearing in mind, this isn't my job, by the way, like, you know, projects that I don't get paid for as well, but doing all these things and completely running myself into the ground. And when you do that, and your nervous system gets shot to pieces, right? Like I was living in a constant state of fight or flight. I wasn't looking after myself. It was becoming increasingly hard to emotionally regulate. I also have ADHD, and, you know, so when you've got trauma and ADHD, you know, emotional regulation is difficult. In that sense. So when you're then running yourself into the ground, it just became increasingly harder to actually look after my mental health, and then add hormonal imbalances. And it's like, you know, because I had a few of them as well. And so, yeah, I was getting stuck in these cycles, and then I'd burn out and I'd crash out, and and then I'd try again to like take care of myself and do the good stuff. And then I'd just get stuck in that cycle again. It would happen again. It just happened over and over again. And I've always maintained that my goal has been to lead with love, right? A lot of my campaigns and initiatives have been about supporting community, amplifying messages of love and support, for trans youth, for trans people. With the idea that, you know, by amplifying love, it's just such a powerful way to drown out the hate, right? And so, but I've now understood that, you know, by doing that, it has to come from within first. You know, love is a powerful act of resistance, especially against those who seek to divide and disempower and erode our community. But I've really had to understand what it means to prioritize myself. Like, it's been a hard lesson. But now for me, like I prioritize self-care. I prioritize pacing myself. I prioritize forgiveness as well, alongside accountability. The two can exist simultaneously, by the way, right? Rather than getting, you know, allowing myself to get engulfed by everything that's going on. You know, I don't really watch the news at the moment. Like, I'm staying away, and I'm implementing boundaries just because of what I do. And I just remind myself that to be able to lead with love, I have to learn to embody love. And in order to do that, I've got to learn to love myself. And by embodying love, you know, there's a ripple effect, and that will filter out into all the work that I do. So I've just had to be very strict with myself to take care of my recovery, to take care of my body, to take care of my health, myself first, and I make no apologies for that, right? You know, I learned very early on to self-neglect and abandon myself, especially to be liked and loved by others. So I've had to challenge myself because there's been a part of me that still seeks validation, that wants to seek validation from other people. And so to challenge myself not to do that, I've kind of been left with a little ball of like, who am I if I'm not who am I if I'm not an activist? Who am I if I don't get on social media? Who am I if like I don't have a relationship or people around? Like, who's me to me? And it's been difficult, you know, but it's been so healing, you know, to just allow those feelings to come up, to cry them out, and just to be like, I just cried out the sense of worthlessness that I feel inside, that I constantly try and avoid by doing X, Y, and Z. So, you know, there's been a lot of learning for me. I mean, I'll be 40 next year, so I feel like I'm getting a bit older and wiser. And so yeah, God, that was a long question.
Well, I'm 40 this year, so I'll let you know how it feels. But I think it is so important. And actually, I spoke to Rico Jacob Chase on the podcast, and they talked about this as well, which is why it's so important to have more than one person. It takes a group, because at times all of us will need to step back to take care of ourselves. So you need to have those other people who are able to kind of step forward, and you need those kind of those alliances and those groups of people that can kind of come up. And obviously one of the things you have spent a lot of time and you focused on was founding the Trans Solidarity Alliance, which is just an incredible organization. For anyone who might be unfamiliar, can you just give us a quick overview of the organization and what you guys do?
Absolutely. Trans Plus Solidarity Alliance is a non-profit organization that supports trans community organizations and activists to work together with cis allies to drive positive change for trans people in the UK. We set up at the end of 2023, and over the years we have facilitated campaigns, parliamentary briefings, we have a political engagement program, and our goal is to advocate for the human rights of trans people. We organised a mass lobby last June, which was the largest LGBTQ political lobby event in UK history, actually, which was incredible. We've also led various campaigns, the Trans Youth of Love campaign, also Trans Secret Santa UK as well. So we do a lot, and I am so blown away by how much it's grown over the years, and the team as well that works so unbelievably hard. We are a team of volunteers. All the work that we've done is in our own time, and yeah, I'm just so very proud of our organisation.
Yeah, you should be. And we'll include a link in the podcast description. So if anyone wants to check it out, they can. I think it's so important. You know, it's interesting because, you know, the trans experience very specifically has become very political, unfortunately, recently. And obviously that's some of the work that you all do. And I think it's so important that there are trans and non-binary people represented in that conversation. We think about the terrible Supreme Court ruling that happened in 2025. And from my understanding, there wasn't a single trans or non-binary person included in that work that led up to that decision. So how's that experience for you been of crossing into that political and, I guess, policy space?
I mean, it's been such a journey for me because I started to get involved in community grassroots activism in the first year of my transition. You know, I was like 6 months into realizing that I was trans, and I made part of a community group in Brighton, and it just kind of happened, right, where I was involved with helping organize protests and being involved with being almost at the front line of a lot of direct action stuff. So it was very different to the stuff that I do today. And it taught me a lot, actually. I learned a lot from other people. We were behind a lot of different campaigns that kind of exploded, solidarity campaigns. There was the hashtag L with the T movement that then gave birth to or inspired, should we say, other hashtag with the T movement. So to be kind of at the center of that with the community, and then having all of that experience over the years and seeing that you could inspire solidarity, you know, you could create a hashtag and you could create a movement, and it gave something for allies to stand behind and empowered them, was a really powerful thing to experience. And over the years, I kind of recognized that actually the power was with our allies, that for 0.5% of the UK population, or under 1% of the global population, trans people just simply could not fight for their own rights alone. Like, it's just not, it would never happen, right? We need allies. So the idea of a Trans Solidarity Alliance actually came to me in 2019, just before COVID. And the idea would be to bring organizations together to talk about what we were gonna do, right? I often think of that phrase, "We are stronger together." We really, really are. And of course, COVID happened and nothing went ahead, and I almost ended up going in a completely different direction with my own career. And it wasn't until the end of 2023 where the thought came. I was seeing what was going on, and I was noticing that, there was the attack on trans rights was just, things were getting worse and worse. And I just thought, perhaps I should revive this idea that actually there was space for another organization. And so I just, I launched the idea. I brought some people together who I knew could help. So I approached people that worked in political spaces, who had lobbying experience, and sort of brought those individuals together. And like I said, the Trans Solidarity Alliance has just grown into such an incredible team. We all bring different skills to the table. I think that's really important to say. Like, I didn't necessarily. I'm not a political expert, never really have been. I've learned so much along the way. But we have those people within the organization, but then we have people with so many different skills. And I've learned so much about working as a collective, and how when you work with people with different skills, you add more, right? And I think that's why we worked well together. We facilitated the mass lobby, and that was just, I mean, what the team managed to pull together was incredible. And it was such a historic moment as well. I really have to give credit to such a hardworking team at TSA, because that mass lobby made international headlines. It was incredible, so we've got an incredible team. It did feel intimidating stepping into that space, but as a team, we've supported one another. We're all friends. We've got such a nice relationship. And there's we don't really have a hierarchy, which I really like as well. We operate as that collective, and I believe that's why we operate very well. But you're right, as you said, with regards to trans voices not being heard. That's something that we do, right? So we platform trans voices in Parliament, and we actually hosted the first all trans panel in Parliament, where we had a whole panel of trans people talking on trans youth and education. And we've tried to continue that work where trans voices are prioritized in those spaces and they are heard. And that's so important.
Yeah, it is so incredibly important. Showing up, having voices of people who have lived experiences for anything that the government might be considering or looking at. I think government's such an important part of it. But then I also think a lot about just the general population. And one of the ways that I think we can reach the general population is through visibility, representation, and just normalizing all aspects of the community, the LGBTQ community, and just people as a whole. And one of the ways we do that is obviously through things like media campaigns. And you were the first non-binary face of Harrods H Beauty. What did that mean to you? How did it come about? And what did it signal, do you think, to the media and advertising industry at the time about where we were going?
I mean, honestly, that Harrods Beauty campaign was one of the best and most pivotal moments in my entire life. And I often talk about it, even though it was 4 or something years ago. And I was actually, I believe, the first trans person as well to be a face for Harrods, to be involved, to be part of a Harrods campaign, let alone just H Beauty. So trans and non-binary as well. It was incredible. Like never in my wildest dreams could I have ever have imagined, if I could tell my young self, oh, by the way, you're going to be in a Harrods campaign, I would never have believed you. You know, I was relentlessly bullied for how I looked when I was at school. So it was an incredibly empowering experience for me because of just that as well, to be involved with that. And you know, I was 33 years old. It was the first summer after my top surgery. And so I was at a point in my transition where I was really coming into myself and finally feeling like in my skin and happy. And it was actually the first lockdown. This was summer of 2020, where so many of us had, you know, it was an awful time for so many. But quite honestly, I had an opportunity to really connect with myself that summer, and I actually had a really nice summer, and it just gave me that chance. But I think I very naturally started to share my experience online a little bit more, which as a speaker, I'm usually used to I was going more into schools at that time, to share that part of my experience. So I was doing it more online, and I believe that's what attracted the casting agent. But I got this DM, which I thought was spam, as you do. You've been casted for a house campaign. Yeah, sure, whatever. Like, you know, it's also
Block.
yeah, I just thought it was a scam. But you know, I looked up the casting agent. I was like, "Oh, it's the biggest casting agent in the world." Okay, maybe it's legit. And it was just wild. I was actually in Italy staying with my mum because I put my stuff in storage, couldn't pay the rent. It was a lockdown. Right? I was, you know, in a bit of a sticky situation. And I was in Italy and I was just looking after myself, and in comes this thing, and I'm doing, you know, the self tape. I like was sticking my iPhone to the window, so I was getting good light. It was like getting the tape, and I spent all day trying to get it right. And you know, then I got a WhatsApp message within a couple of weeks telling me that I got it, and I was like, what? And that they were going to fly me back to England. I mean, here's me where I've got my stuff in storage, and it's like, and they flew me back to do the commercial, and it was so amazing. Like, I'd never done a shoot in my life ever, right? I know I'd done one shoot, tell her that. I'd done one shoot before with a photographer just for like some headshots. But like, and then all of a sudden, you know, I'm getting recorded, and I had to do this whole commercial, and they, you know, and it just, yeah, apparently it was everywhere. And I remember them asking me, they were like, look, everybody that's involved in this campaign, talks about their beauty, you know, and it was like, my beauty is my art, or my beauty is, you know, whatever. And what is yours? And I remember thinking, like, actually, my beauty is being myself. And that became my sort of phrase for the commercial. And actually it's been my motto, really. And it's not about external beauty. I just want to say that it's not about like necessarily just my transition and the way that I looked. It was about finding self-acceptance. It was about starting to find that sense of pride and love for myself that I'd never felt. That's what my beauty is being myself really means to me. And it's really important for me to say that, because it's, you know, as I'm going on this journey, I continue to try and, you know, and access that sense of finding beauty from within, rather than to look outside of myself. And it's an ongoing journey for me, but it was life changing. And my career just went in a completely different direction. It's like the lockdown eased, and all of a sudden I've got an agent. All of a sudden, you know, I was in Vogue that year as well, Vogue Italia specifically. And I'm doing, you know, castings, and then I was in Glow Up, and I was doing all these different bits and pieces here and there. And it was so much fun. And, you know, the reason that I really enjoyed the panel with Ella Morgan and Zia Glasson the other night and talking about representation is because I really do believe in it. So I wanted to do that too, right? I was so passionate about, you know, being that person for, you know, trans youth that were like me, who thought it was never possible to be who you are, or that you would never get there. And I really wanted to show them that, you know, it's never too late, you know, ever. And actually, sorry, never too late. They're young. Let's say that, well, yeah, it's never too late to be who you are.
Yeah.
And that, um, and that even if they're not themselves right now, you know, that one day they'll get a chance, you know, it will happen, and you just have to keep going. So yeah, I'd love to do more stuff like that. I've gotten very like pigeonholed in my activism nowadays. So I do less of that, unfortunately.
It's so important though. And I think there was such an interesting time in kind of the early 2020s where we were seeing we were seeing an improvement anyway from my perspective of representation in things like advertising campaigns and the way the brands were working with people. It does feel like we've now seen an unfortunate shift again. I think often that is kind of pinpointed to the Dylan Mulvaney campaign with Bud Light and the kind of the backlash that happened on both sides of the equation there. And we've seen brands kind of pull away from it. I have a very strong opinion on this, that this kind of backlash that people think is happening is kind of perceived, not reality. Boots here in the UK did an incredible 2024 Christmas campaign where they featured non-binary and trans individuals. And there was a lot of quote unquote backlash online. Look at their sales figures. It didn't impact it at all. They had the same sales, if not better sales, than they would have during the kind of Christmas period. So I am a strong believer that it's perceived and we just need to be louder than the backlash. So when you think about the fact that there are fewer brands kind of showing up for the LGBTQ plus community in the kind of the bold ways that Harrods did, what advice, I guess, would you offer to those brands who want to engage with the community, who want to have that visibility, but that are just nervous given the current climate?
If they're nervous, hire a consultant, hire an educator, hire someone like me to come in and to educate the team, because I know there's a lot of fear, and I know that because most of the organizations that I work with, we talk about the fear, right? And them not knowing how to get it right and wanting to get it right, but also the fear of what might happen if they do. And just kind of, I know that a lot of brands just kind of, I don't want to say most, but I know there are brands out there that just want to avoid that little headache. You know, they might think, let's just kind of, I'm not anti-trans, I'm not opposed to it, but let's just not, because it's easier not to, because trans people are just a you know, small minority. So let's just, you know, but every time you do that, you're feeding into the issue, to the problem that is just so much greater than just the attack on the trans community. It is an attack on human rights, and what we're seeing around the world, right? It's part of the same issue. And it's important to recognize that the same movement that is attempting to roll back LGBTQ plus rights is the very same movement that is seeking to erode women's rights. Like, we must understand that. And we cannot afford to succumb to the pressure or retreat. If you retreat into silence and you begin to do that, you'll get, like, more will come, believe you me. And actually, the most powerful thing you can do is to ensure that you represent all people, particularly those that are more marginalized, because brands can have real influence, you know. And when that comes, you know, when one brand does that, again, it gives permission for another brand to do the same. But if we work together, you know, that kind of influence has the ability to create real change, you know, meaningful change. And I understand that there feels like that includes risk, but I mean, you know, that's the world we're living in today. But I believe that the more organizations that stand firm, the harder it becomes to isolate and silence any one of them, you know. And the closer and closer we're going to move towards lasting progress, actually the power is within, you know, the media. It is within, you know, brand campaigns. It's within, you know, the kind of platforms that have wider reach. When we begin to humanize trans people like myself, which, you know, anyone would watch me and think, oh, just like, you know, my friend, like, and I get this all the time, that people are shocked. They're almost shocked that I'm just like regular, you know. And I'm like, I barely even wear color. I think this is the kind of, you know, I don't wear rainbow. Like, I'm not. But that's because, you know, we exist in all our forms, like in all our color, like we're just people like everybody else, right? And so, but even the people that do wear rainbows, like, we're human beings are diverse by nature, right? And we're all different. And so it doesn't surprise me when you say that there was no difference in boot sales. In fact, they did better because by focusing on diversity, we're focusing on all people,
Yeah.
not just about one group. Being inclusive isn't just about including, we're including lots of groups, and all of those groups make up the human race. Like we're diverse by nature, and inclusivity is just a part of bringing everyone to the table, right? And it's just, and we shouldn't, and this is another thing, I say look at me, but also we shouldn't have to assimilate, right? I shouldn't have to just look like your regular person. We should be embraced for who we are. And one of the things that I loved that Ella said was that she wants to see diversity in all its, we want to see older trans people represented, as well. Like there's this expectation you have to kind of like meet a certain kind of standards in order to be accepted by the cis community, and actually no, like why should that be? And actually we need to be represented across the board. Like there should be more representation of more people. So change has never been made by playing it safe. It's been made when people, like brands, choose to show up with courage, choose to show up with clarity, and make a commitment to do the right thing, even when the current climate feels really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree. I've spoken to many a CMO and said kind of real allyship is showing up even when it's slightly inconvenient to do so. There is a little bit of risk. We recognize that risk, but that's why it actually brings me back to something we were talking about right at the start, which is it's why it's so important to have representation on both sides of the camera. Because if you have representation internally at your company, you have representation on your boards and on your leadership teams, I believe you're much more likely to make decisions that are more diverse, that are more inclusive, because you have that within yourselves as well. So I think it's that kind of that duality of it that is really important, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes. Because visibility can change lives, and I do genuinely believe that. And obviously you do such incredible work from a visibility perspective, but as we've also touched on, it can expose you to scrutiny, and it can expose you to quote unquote trolls online. So how do you kind of navigate that side of things as someone who both sits publicly at the intersection of activism and media and fashion and everything else in between?
Yeah, and I'd say the scrutiny extends beyond just the trolls. We're often held to a standard, and I will often hear more scrutiny and feedback in the negative sense than sometimes otherwise. And maybe that just comes from this kind of personal expectation as well. I don't know. But of course, yes, there is a lot of scrutiny, and it's a tough world out there, particularly online, I have to say. And there's been moments where I have actually been, really badly trolled, and it's been, especially with one singular post, it has been a lot, especially with regards to my non-binary identity, and people completely, invalidating it or mocking me, and it's really important to me. And as much as I feel very proud of that part of my identity, it still takes its toll. But I've learned just to not give trolls my time. Like I have a very strict delete and block policy, where if I see one word that is remotely negative, it's just out. I don't even register it, and I certainly don't. I don't argue with people online. I don't give my time trying to talk them round. I do enough in my work to educate and engage and attempt to empower people in that way. I just don't feel the need to do it online. And obviously looking after my physical and mental and spiritual health is my priority today. And it's interesting because I've spoken about these different facets of my career, and I guess there's been times where I've sort of been a bit more visible, and I've had brand collaborations, and I've done more of that work, and nowadays I've kind of been pushed into the direction of activism a bit more. And I say push because it was never my intention to kind of just go off in one direction more than another. I actually really, really enjoyed the work that I did with brands, and actually when I think of this year, maybe it's something that I can focus a bit more on, because it can be really draining. It can be a lot. And in fact, the last project I worked on, which I actually love, is the Trans Secret Santa UK initiative, where we raise lots of money and send gifts to trans youth across the country, but I was exhausted, and I've had to really sort of step back and have a think about how I'm going to take care of myself, and how I want to kind of move into 2026, because it's a lot. It's draining, it's anxiety inducing, someone that's lived their life fearing what people think, which I want to say, but on the flip side I kind of want to challenge at the same time, because it really doesn't matter. Like I've got to a stage now where I just think the most important person is me, and the work's great, right? But like I don't need to pay so much attention to what people think, particularly when, do I even like those people? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, why am I giving all my attention to anti-trans people, like, as well? I just think, I'm more effective when I focus on the solution. Like I'm a solutions person. I think, okay, so this is happening, let's do this. This is happening, let's focus on love and solidarity. And it not just because it's needed, because it also helps me when I'm sucked into, and I've been sucked into all the negativity, and I go down like a rabbit hole, and I doom scroll, and I get stuck, and my mental health crumbles, and then I'm no good to anyone. And actually, sometimes when I'm in that, it can alienate, and it's valid, because it's hard not to nowadays. The hate is so loud, right? It's just everywhere. And so to say I'll just ignore it, that's not what I'm saying. But what I have learned is that I have to learn to prioritize my well-being, particularly as someone with a history of mental health and addiction challenges. So this is how I'm dealing with it, and it's just been a process of learning, year in, year out, and getting to a stage now where I actually probably feel stronger than ever, which is amazing. Although I'm like I'm not, I barely worked, it's like works, but it's been necessary for me to take some time out and to really think about that. But I don't know if that's answered your question.
It did, and I think it is so important that we do focus on ourselves when we need to. Actually, arguably, at all times we should be focused on ourselves, right? If we are crumbling, or if we're not at our best, we can't do our best work, and we can't bring kind of all the work that we need to bring to bear. And I think what's interesting is this kind of journey we've gone on this podcast. We started this podcast talking about you as your younger self. So I'd love to ask you, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be? And would it be different if I just said, what advice would you give to a young LGBTQ plus person today in 2026?
So I actually wrote a letter to my young trans self recently, and it was a part of the Trans Secret Santa project. We printed them out actually and sent them out to 900 kids. But I wrote a whole letter to myself, and I was trying to communicate to those young people. And one of the things that I always say is this idea of holding on, because actually it was something that I remember just thinking to myself when I was young. Things were really intense and really hard and really difficult, and there were times where I thought that I wasn't going to make it. And actually, not to get entirely personal, but there were times that I almost didn't, right? And there were some really extreme consequences to some of, unfortunately, my self-destructive behaviors. But I luckily pulled through, and I just want to say this to young people. If it's hard, like, just hold on to a sense that it can and will get better if you do. Like, and I don't for a minute want to assume what anyone's life is like, but I just know how hard it was for me growing up, and I know that I have got to a place now where it is better. I'm not free from some of the hardships that I went through, but it's become like some of that has strengthened me to a point that I've become, and this is the thing, we talk about resilience, I've become so resilient. But that word can be really exhausting, and I want young people to know that life can get easier if you hold on. And I would have said something similar. I would say something similar to a young LGBTQ person, even if it's not right now. one day you'll get the chance to be who you truly are. So just never give up, ever.
Yeah. That's probably the most important message we can give to people. Don't give up, and that there is a path to it being better. So I really appreciate that, and I know others will. Jude, thank you so much for being on Queer Talker with me. This has been such an incredible conversation, such an interesting conversation, but also I've admired you for a long time, and I've just admired the work you do, the activism you do, the visibility you bring, your ability to bring people together. We talked a lot about the event that happened last week in London. Your ability to bring the community together is so important, because we do all need each other now more than ever. So more than anything, I just want to say a massive thank you for everything you do for the entire LGBTQ+ community.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for having me.